So, hello and welcome to another session of Great Shouts Marketing Growth Interviews. I'm Ed Davidson. I'm a fractional head of marketing and host of these sessions. These are all about how a company moves from a startup phase of growth into a scale up phase of growth. And they are interviews with founders and kind of marketing experts that have been through this process. And we hope it's really useful for kind of other founders and other CEOs. And today I'm delighted to say we've got Rob Smith on. Hi, Rob.
Hey Ed, how you doing?
Good to see you. Good stuff. So Rob's got a super deep background in marketing from roles at Renault and Philips and L'Oreal. And then in 2018, he co-founded Slick. So it's a B2B SaaS company. It's targeting hair and beauty salons. And if I've got this right, Rob, it's kind of moving them away from these paper diaries into a more efficient world of like booking appointments online. Is that correct to say?
Yeah, that's broadly the thesis. There's another side to it, which is a lot of those B2B sort of platforms. It's your legacy on-prem solution. You're thinking Windows 1995, big clunky grey desktops that everyone hates, especially if you're a small business owner. We're essentially replacing that with a cloud-based solution on an iPad. So think Nokia 3210 meets iPhone 15. So yes, you've got that white space. You're transitioning people from pen and paper, but you're also taking people from kind of on-prem clunky solutions to something that's a little bit more user-friendly, more 2024 than 1984.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Okay, good stuff. So the question that I kind of start things off with to give a little bit of a kind of baseline here is how do you define when a startup moves to that kind of scale up phase of growth?
Um, I think there's probably two, you could answer that in two ways. I think with my founder hat on it, I think it's where you start to see genuine traction, genuine retention in terms of your kind of your commercial metrics. Um, so your churn rate starts to stabilize, starts to go in the right direction. Your conversion in terms of demo, your conversion in terms of upsell to your more advanced plans, your premium plans, payment attachment rates. That's where you start to know you're hitting the sweet spot. I think if I answer it with a marketing hat on, it comes down to the performance metrics in terms of your marketing messaging down back to your ICP. And I think that's the big thing that when we first started, we looked at, it's like, right, well, there are 50,000 hair and beauty salons in the UK. We're not selling to the chains, but they are 900. So that's 49,100 salons. We'll sell to them all. And suddenly you start to go, hang on a minute. You start to meet a few more people, you do your research, you start to look into see what's working. And that what started out as an ICP, but a very broad ICP, becomes narrower and narrower and narrower and narrower. And that's driven both in terms of an understanding of pain points, an understanding of what your system, what you do, and you've potentially got a great vision of this. It's the most amazing platform that's going to do everything, and you realize you can't build all of that. So it tightens. But also then you start to look at your data of that this message is resonating, this message isn't. And I think it's that tipping point where you start to really see you have the confidence to tighten down on your ICP, your messaging, and you then start to see that reflecting in the data and it starts to move upwards and to the right. And you're like, actually, okay, here we are at that. We're starting to it's starting to work here. Whereas before at that sort of startup phase, it's still a bit broken. It's still not really sure what you're doing. It's that scale up phase where it starts to kind of all start to move in one direction, broadly a positive direction.
And that's really interesting, isn't it? Because I think, some people think it's kind of niche down initially, and then as you kind of scale up, you go into kind of a wider kind of Venn diagram of people. But it's really interesting that I haven't heard that before. So actually, the scale up phase is when you found that sweet spot, but it is a super tight niche. Okay.
Yeah,
What was
and
that?
that niche could still be 30. That niche could be 30,000 businesses. It doesn't have to be a small niche. It can be a very big niche, but it's
Mm.
having that confidence of understanding really what you've tried, you've tested different messages, tested different go to markets, free trial, demo, whatever it might be, and you then hit on that combination of messaging and go to market levers that starts to really work. And crucially, you've got the data at the back end to then understand, okay, yes, they've signed up, yes, they've converted. How long are they staying? What's my ability to move them up the scale in terms of payment plans? What's my ability to upsell? What am I having to do in terms of discounting or anything to retain them? Then you start to really understand that flywheel.
And what was it for you then? Is it what was your kind of niche of those salons then? Was it a specific kind of cohort of profile of people or geography? What was your niche?
Um, Geography is a really interesting one. We have a sort of slightly strange go-to-market in some respects, in that yes, we're selling into SMBs, but our sort of sales cycle and our sales process is more of an enterprise sale. So we have teams on the ground. Salon owners buy from people. If you have a purely digital only acquisition sort of go-to-market, you're missing out on the 20,000 who are on pen and paper, because they're not on LinkedIn. They're not really spending much time on Instagram. They're certainly not searching for your solution. Category awareness is very low. You need to go to them. Um, but not every single area of the UK is built equally. And we had somebody in the northeast who their results were pretty poor. But ultimately, that's because we found that the vast majority of salons up there didn't have Wi-Fi, and you can't sell into a business if they don't have Wi-Fi, especially if you're selling a cloud solution. And so we had to pull out from that area because it's making it hard for yourself. London, lots of salons, but they are either very high end or they're pretty low end. There's not a huge amount in the middle. And so where from a geography and a sort of, I guess, a strategy, what we found works really well is identifying really strong regional towns, market towns, high streets, where you've got really good positive sort of socio-economic indicators of the health of the high street. They're vibrant in terms of occupancy versus closure rates. The local economy is really is performant. There's money there to be spent. That's who we target, and then you get a network effect if they all know each other. So you get one customer on board, they recommend it to another friend. Suddenly you've got two of the 20 salons in the town. Get a third, and you start to get a very mini sort of network effect, a flywheel. And before you know it, you've got 30% market share.
Mm, mm.
The rest is going to come down the funnel later on, and you can literally almost go town by town, identifying the sort of the towns you want to win.
And that, I suppose, it really interesting kind of land and expand, but by particular town. And were you very kind of data driven in seeing which towns to go after there, to be able to say that there is that best fit, and then you could like go in, find a salon, and then, as you say, the network effect would kind of expand out within them.
Yeah, so we did. We used they're not called this anymore. We used the local data company, and we bought data across the UK to identify where there were the most salons, but also crucially what areas were they in, and what was the sort of the socio-economic profile of that area. Was it super affluent? Was it relatively under, deprived? Where do we want to be, and where do we sort of see our ICP? So you might see lots of barbers in a certain area, but is that going to be, are they essentially fronts and they're pretty dodgy, or actually they really sort of, they're serving a thriving community? And so we looked at that at a sort of macro level, and we then bought the data for the salons or the barbershops within that region. That's then processed through our sales team, goes through our sort of, both in terms of kind of email cadences, but also our SDR function. So yeah, it is pretty targeted.
And I suppose going on to there in terms of different channels, for you there's a big part of it which is outbound and sales channel versus marketing.
Yeah,
How do those kind of coincide, and how do you kind of split budgets to have the most impact in terms of acquisition?
I think for us, a lot of our, I mean, it's odd for a scale up. The vast majority of our kind of acquisition spend is in sales and it's in outbound, because we're trying to, I hate the phrase, but we're trying to disrupt a very antiquated industry. If you think you take your average hotel restaurant, they've been using online booking for 10, 15 years. Salons, they are probably 10, 15 years behind a lot of their sort of, I guess, high street counterparts, and they are, dyslexia rates are high, digital literacy is low. So the outbound works quite well. However, to disrupt the on-prem solutions, the legacy providers, you need to explain why you are different, because ultimately they've got software. And if somebody rings up and says, "Well, I'm from a software company," they just say, "I've got software. I've already got it. I don't need new software." And so that's where you have to invest in brand building. And so we do spend decent amounts in terms of the usual social channels. Trade press is an interesting one. And that's still quite a big channel for our industry. It still has a big role to play. It still is seen um, as a bit of a kind of an industry thought leadership piece. People rely on that for their news, what's trending, what products are coming out, and so we've done quite a lot with them. I think it's very hard to measure the return on that. And you start to see some glimpses of that. So it's about trying to balance your investment there for real kind of brand awareness, but then also some of the more performing channels in terms of driving traffic to the site, driving more kind of mid funnel activity. And so we actually work with a sort of fractional agency, but they're a B2C specialist because we think of our consumer or our customer as they're a consumer. We're not selling to a CFO or a CMO who's on LinkedIn. We're selling to your local hairdresser who they're on Instagram. The content they consume is on Instagram. And so actually thinking about us as a challenger, almost a D2C, B2C brand, rather than a kind of B2B brand, we've actually sort of started to find works quite well.
And how much of the message there is, or the kind of targeting is kind of direct response with an action versus maybe content or kind of an education play? Because by the sounds of things, they necessarily know they've got a need, and they not say, they're problem aware because they know they can improve it, but not kind of say kind of solution aware. So is an education part that plays a part there?
No, you've hit the nail on the head. And I think that was a painful learning of you're so passionate about your product. I thought it's better than product Y because we do this, and you're in some sort of really niche detail which just doesn't translate. It translates okay on a demo, but even then, like you've got to work pretty hard. It just does not translate in a 30-second short form ad. And
Mm.
so you're totally right. They are these small business owners. They're working on their own. They don't have a business partner. They're not mentored by anybody. They've got fantastic education on the technical side of the job, coloring, cutting. They've got no business education. And so what we've really made a big play on, both in terms of our marketing, but also our customer success offering, is that education, that content, and providing short form, long form content on, look, these are tips to run a salon. If you've got a no-show cancellation problem, these are the things you should be doing. If you're sort of worried about profitability, have you checked these three things? Go into your reports and trying to make it brand agnostic and trying to deliver content that really, whether you're using a paper diary, whether you're using Slick, whether you're using a competitor, yes, you're going to pull that information in different ways, but ultimately you should be able to pull that information and be able to use our content and the advice, the education that we're giving you to drive performance within your business. And that could be from topics as diverse as sort of staff retention down to driving footfall, driving traffic, driving SEO, whatever it might be, because these are all topics that, as a fractional marketeer yourself, you know that a lot of businesses struggle with this. They don't have that in-house expertise. They don't know who to turn to. And if you can be positioning yourself as that authority, it really helps your credibility and drives that awareness. And suddenly when people are looking for a solution, you're top of mind.
And I suppose on that, are there any kind of partnerships or influencers that you engage with to produce content or have kind of recommendations and referrals that means that they're kind of trusted in that community and that's worked for you?
It's a great one. We've tried a lot of partnerships. We have a partnership with L'Oreal,
Mm.
and they're a shareholder, that massively helps with sort of that trust, that credibility. I think we've tried the wholesale sort of commercial partnership route, whereby they're selling into salons, we're selling into salons. Look, there's a synergy here. Ultimately, if we're driving footfall, we're driving occupancy, that's going to drive products spend, that's going to be good for you. It's almost um, it takes too long for them to see the commercial return on that.
Right.
And so they will invest in it. They almost expect, right, well, have I seen product sales jump by 20% in the last couple of days? No. Okay, well, it doesn't work then. It's a
Mm.
slow burn. Where we see real kind of, I guess, success in terms of that influence piece is just peer-to-peer recommendation. And it's probably not dissimilar to founders, CFOs, CMOs. We all know each other. What are you using? What tool are you using that's really helping? And they all went to college together. They go to the same wholesaler together. They go to the same L'Oreal course together. And yes, they're in competition, but they are broadly kind of is friendly competition. So we see, I mean, 30% of our inbound is coming from peer-to-peer referrals. So they're non-paid, they're just people that have heard about Slip because their mates are using it. We run a paid referral program. Our paid referrals are tiny.
Really, I was going to ask about incentivizing. So that it's more of a kind of kudos thing, isn't it? If it works for you, then I would recommend it to somebody else, as opposed to
Yeah,
needing anything of value back. Yeah,
yeah.
interesting. And I suppose kind of you had talked to like acquisition there. How much time, as you've gone from like that startup to scale up, do you kind of focus on retention? And what levers are you trying to pull there to keep customers in terms of customer marketing as well?
Um, Retention is it's a big focus purely because we spend a lot on acquiring a customer.
Hmm.
Because typically they are very sticky. And the marketeer's example I give of this is always if I was to, I mean, I'm sure you probably use HubSpot. If I was to say to you, right, Ed, you need to leave HubSpot and move to Pipedrive, I can't imagine you're sort of looking forward to that sort of that concept. And it's the same with the salons of CRM. You've got to move 1,000 appointments. You've got to move 4,000 clients, all their notes, all their history, all the settings, all the automation. Like people don't want to do it. And so that's why we're quite happy to spend to acquire, because naturally the retention is pretty strong. It's pretty embedded, especially if you're then attaching payment systems in place, websites, it's pretty sticky. But I think you have to still show value. And that's where it comes back to that kind of content education piece of it's something that we really kind of focus on, monthly newsletters, customer success team, webinars of we want you to use the product. It's a modular product, but we want you to use every single feature because it's been designed in such a way that it's going to add value to your business, whether that be driving footfall, driving bookings, reducing cancellations, increasing AOV, whatever it might be. There are tools there. We need to provide you with the kind of the education on how to use it, but also why it should be used and why it's going to be useful. And so in some ways, it's very similar content to the stuff we're using for acquisition. It's just slightly more sort of tailored towards Slick, the features, how to, as opposed to why to.
And I imagine that there is quite a sweet spot there where you kind of onboarding somebody and they're putting everything in and they may be running alongside with paper and diary. But if it is better, then they'll decide to move forward with it and then they're very sticky and then they're unlikely to churn, right? Is there a little bit of a
Yeah,
aha moment there?
there's it that tends to come slightly earlier. It tends to come in the sort of the demo because again, like you come back to CRMs, you probably wouldn't run Pipedrive and HubSpot simultaneously.
Mm. Hmm.
Because suddenly you put a follow-up action in one but not the other, then okay, what's your source of truth? And activity is changing, bookings are being made, bookings are being edited, deleted all the time. So there is very much a kind of a cold, hard switch off of I'm moving from paper to Slick, or I'm moving from another system to Slick. And that's where, yeah, from an onboarding point of view, we facilitate that with, and we put a lot of work into sort of switching, data import, data migration, etc. But the aha moment really comes from, yeah, understanding their pain points and having really clear, compelling messaging and testimonials of the industry kind of um, attitude towards software is it's grey, it's clunky, it doesn't really provide any form of return. They see it as a cost as opposed
Hmm.
to this is making me money. And once you can actually have that aha moment of this is going to make you money, suddenly the sales cycle ramps up, speeds up, your conversion rate massively jumps. That's the sweet spot that I guess, coming back to your original question of sort of startup versus scale up, that's where you're getting into that sweet spot.
Makes sense. The- Have you played around again, startup to scale up with pricing as well? In the way I imagine you have.
Yeah, I mean that would be. I mean that's one for another podcast on just on pricing strategy because it's we played around with it a lot, and we started off with a very much a very classic per seat model, which was probably a little bit too ambitious relative to the in market pricing. And we then actually said, right, does taking price was then is obviously used as a major objection. Does take if we take price off the table, does that ramp conversion and does that ramp inbound? And so we pivoted through 180 degrees. basically for, I can't remember what it was, but for X cohort, it was free, no cost. And for if you're over X number of seats, it's Y cost. Um, and we ran that for about 8 weeks. And I mean, I have to dig out the graph. It did not move the needle one iota.
Yeah, okay.
And it's again, it comes back to that CRM analogy of like switching is really painful. You've got to be really motivated to switch. Price isn't really, it shouldn't be a key objection because there are so many pain points you can solve. You've got to get them excited and motivated to switch, and the price is just not really a thing. But then we then went through another iteration where we were a combination of per seat, but then sort of activity based, so per booking, and that actually worked quite well from an acquisition point of view because you started off you're very affordable. It then created a retention challenge because then the perception is as we actually start to work and as the automation start to kick in, you are generating revenue for that customer, but your costs are going up. And so what they're seeing is, well, hang on, Slick started at X pounds per month. Now it's Y. And that's a 50% jump. And they weren't able to make that tangential link between, well, that's because my revenue's increased by 25%. So this is making me money. And so we actually have ended up settling on back on almost a very kind of classic per seat, good, better, best pricing plan. If you scale up, add columns, it gets more expensive. You reduce columns, seats, it goes down. So it's been good to experiment with it. But internally it creates obviously a lot of friction. Moving customers from different price plans is hard. You then got people that again it gets out of, well, so and so is still paying this. They're on grandfather rate and they're all so close. They're very happy to discuss pricing. So it's good to experiment. There's definitely I would definitely have done it in a different way, I think. Probably done it earlier, done it in much more sort of closed, controlled trial than making big kind of changes.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's difficult to do that, but it's obviously kind of learning over time, isn't it? I
Yeah,
suppose another interesting one is around brand and how brand operates. And you touched on it slightly there, kind of earlier on. Yeah, often investors are you kind of looking at spending Y, getting X, you've got the returns. It's a very clear returns, these from a marketing perspective.
yeah.
And brand is maybe considered a little bit later. Where's kind of brand fitted in your kind of your process there and your evolution of Slick?
Um, if I'm very honest, it's fitted in too late,
Mm,
and it's something that we should have spent more on earlier because they are they're very as an audience they are very influenced by brand, and it's something that it doesn't come as a huge surprise. And having worked in the industry is something probably should have I probably should have pushed more on in hindsight because we have a very strong brand in that we're the only software that is female founded. 85% of our workforce are female. In hair industry, 80% of employees are female. So you have a very nice kind of sort of natural fit. Our tone of voice sort of fits with our audience. We're not corporate, we're not grey, we're not run by white men in suits. But I think we could do more. We could have done more to have told that story and bring that front and center. And I think a combination of being sort of SaaS, being backed by L'Oreal, there was an element of right. Well, no, we need to be serious. We need to be we're a software company. If we are seen to be credible, people will take us seriously as a startup, and you have that inferiority complex. Whereas I think actually, if we lent more into who we are and being authentic, of look, we're female founded, we're here to help hairdressers. We're not. A lot of the terminology we use is very specific to the industry, but we still use it's even now it's still is a lot better than it used to be. But the website, it still feels like a SaaS product
mm,
as opposed to, and that's what we're trying to get away from. We're trying to say, look, it's a diary, it's a CRM system. It's going to help you make money. It shouldn't have all of the kind of the hallmarks of a software, and yet it's very easy to fall into that trap. And that comes in terms of every single sort of touch point throughout across your sort of your marketing collateral. So it's definitely something I wish we'd done more of to start with. And it's I think once it's not a huge part of your marketing spend, it's quite hard. It's quite hard to shift it. Like you should do it in increments as opposed to making that a full sale sort of shift. It's all about being brave. But hopefully as we scale up and we start to generate more cash, you can start to invest more in that. And it might be a bit belatedly, but better late than never.
Yeah. For
It's
me,
funny, like I guess having worked at some big FMCGs where they've got brands, but you then sort of see the creatives coming from Central, which are very campaign orientated. It's designed to shift 50,000 units, 200,000 units, a million units at peak. They were the campaigns that we used to rail against. They were the ones who were like, why are we? It's a campaign on a product, talking about the technology. There is nothing brand related here. Um, it's funny how it's very easy to lose sight of that. And you're so in the you want to drive traffic, you want to drive acquisition, and you've got investors barking down your neck. Okay, well, we need to see numbers, numbers, numbers. Investing in brand can feel like something for later down the line. But in startup scale ups, big corporates, it's I mean, look, you know the data, I know the data. It's proven. Like if you invest in brand and you keep your brand consistent over years, you get that compound effect. Um, but it's very easy to be swayed by the performance team, and to go start focusing a bit too going a bit too niche. But
and it's the most difficult to attribute, right? Marketing's hard enough in
totally,
itself. It's the most difficult to attribute, but it's the longevity that builds up. I suppose moving on then to the team and how you scaled up the team from the early stage, startup, maybe you and your founder to where you are now. What are the kind of key areas of growth that you found that have worked in the team? Kind of what mistakes, if you can talk about it, that you've made? I think it's
yeah.
really interesting, just that even in terms of the culture and things like that, as you've grown as a business.
I think we've I think one of the challenges we've had is you've got to find somebody that really understands your audience.
Mm.
And I think you can do it. And I think I did it at L'Oreal, where I'm not a natural sort of hair beauty aficionado. And in some ways my sort of superpower was being able to step outside of the bubble. And at L'Oreal, there was everyone was passionate about hair and beauty. So everyone gets super excited about the latest molecule. And I'm there going, I don't really get the hype. And I also represent the 6, 7 million women who they also don't get the hype. They just want some shampoo to wash their hair. They
Mm.
don't care whether it's got molecule X or molecule Y. They just want it to feel soft, shiny, do what it says on the tin. And so I think having a sort of a contrary view on a product and on an audience can be really sort of beneficial. But you've got to get really close to your customer. And whether you're doing that by data, whether you're doing that by getting out there, talking to customers, I think we've had marketers before who have not done that. They don't either have the natural empathy or the natural curiosity. And they're not able to use the data to really try and understand that. And I think that's one of the big challenges is you've got to be able to do one of the two. But having a top-rated performance marketer has got a great track record of running and scaling a brand is brilliant, but they've got to have that natural empathy, and that curiosity to get under the skin of the customer, really understand what the customer's pain points are. And not all marketers do that. I think they might get obsessed by. In some ways, I think it's very easy to lose sight of what we're trying to do. We're here to
Mm.
solve a problem. These customers have problem X. We solve it with solution Y. If you're not sort of stripping it back to that, it's very easy to get lost in the metrics of, okay, what's my CTR? What's my like? You lose sight of what we're here to do and what our messaging is looking like and what we're putting out into the market. And so I think that's where the team that we've got now, the fractional team, they really get our audience. And so even being able to pick up on trending memes, GIFs that are actually it shows that we understand our audience. Is what they're sharing. It feels like we know them. And
Mm.
that it feels like an odd thing to be kind of talking about when you're in B2B SaaS, but it's all about, showing that you understand your audience. You're part of their tribe. And you've got to find ways of doing that. Now, that could be in classic B2B SaaS. That might be a sort of thought leadership piece from somebody that's very well respected in the industry. In B2B SaaS for hairdressing, it might be showing a Taylor Swift meme.
Mm. Yeah.
because that's what they're talking about. That's what they're picking up on their social feeds. And if you're doing that, you're fishing in the same pond. Um, so I think that's been being confident enough to almost sort of say, look, this is who we are, this is our audience, and we're going to align ourselves with our audience in everything that we do, our tone of voice. I think that's really important, but you've got to really understand your audience, and really spend time with them.
Makes perfect sense. Rob, we're out of time. Thank you so much for all that content. Really useful and really interesting. The one question I try and end these with is if you could distill everything down that we've been talking about for the last half an hour, what one thing could you recommend to a CEO or a founder going from that startup to scale up phase?
Um, I think you've got to differentiate your pitch to your investor around your TAM, because you're going to want to say to the investor, look, there is a £1 billion, billion, 2 billion, 8 billion, 20 billion TAM here. That TAM is your that is 100% of what you potentially can get. You can't sell to that TAM on day one. And TAM and ICP are very different.
Hmm.
And I think people often almost confuse the two of like, right, my TAM is hair salons in the UK. That's true, but you're not selling to every single. Your ICP is not every single one of those. Your ICP might be every single one of those in 20 years' time, but in the first 6 months, first 12 months, find a smaller niche. You've got to drill down. I think that's what I wish we'd sort of done is actually get much tighter, really work out what works. And look, that audience has got to be big enough so you can then sort of scale it. There's no point focusing on a tiny sort of subset of an audience, which once you've kind of exhausted, that's you done, and you've then got a totally different audience. But don't be afraid to be really tight, and get really focused, because it feels scary of saying, right, we're not going after this competitor, we're not going after there, we don't go after really beauty salons or nail salons. We focus hair and beauty barbering. And that felt scary to say that we're not looking at this part of the audience we could do. And you've got inbound, but I think you've got to be quite focused. And
Hmm.
look, you've got to test the hypothesis. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. But if you're right, you can keep doubling down. And that's where you then get that capital efficiency. And then you can then scale up once you've sort of proven that.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, look, thank you so much. And thanks everyone, and I'll see you at the next session.
Thanks very much, Ed.
Thanks.